place when the innovation came, and all the new things did enter my brain. Sitting at the table with all of my toys, making a strange noise like Johnny. So it's like, what if I had all of these katane, and then all of these katana? We've got 2 injury, 1 injury. Don't battle each other. So I really have 4 successes. And here I have 5 successes. So the player is successful, but they're injured, and that is the magic of narrative dice. Greetings, program. Sorry, I got a little distracted there. I was interpreting the role, as we call it. Welcome back to Runehammer, how to play D&D like a very large badass. That's what we're going to try to do in this video by doing Mind Expansion Quest. We are talking about mechanics innovators, namely Numenera and Genesys. 2 big old textbook scale books, and you need to know some of the innovations in these game systems, and maybe we can size up these books while we're at it. So come on into the table and let's talk about some crazy stuff. Okay guys, what's going on? It's old Hankrin, your buddy here. Today we're going to talk about mechanics innovations. So one of the biggest ones that I've talked a lot about on the channel, you can go back and dig around in my playlist for it. There's a few Dungeon World videos. And even though I didn't really summarize Dungeon World, which is a totally awesome, emergent, postmodern RPG that you need to have in your collection, didn't fully summarize that book and that RPG system, but mainly talked about its, to me, core innovation, which is fixed difficulty. But basically on a 2d6, 7 is always that threshold of failure no matter what you're doing in any situation. It never changes, and fixed difficulty lets the mechanics of the game focus themselves elsewhere. But this video is not about Dungeon World. This is about 2 new sets of mechanics innovators that I want to talk about. Now wait, why bother? Isn't everybody just playing 5e, or maybe everybody's playing a little bit of index card, right? Which, you know, those are just rollover D20 systems. They're pretty familiar to anyone who's ever played anything D20 oriented, or even something like GURPS, which just use 3d6 sort of in place of D20, but very similar guts. So why talk about these mechanics innovators, or sort of emergent or innovative dice and play systems, when, you know, our main thrust of the channel here and of what we do is kind of like D20 type games, right? The same reason that Dungeon World fascinated me, because there is much to learn in innovative mechanics from other games. Either they can find their way into your game, or they can illuminate parts of your current dice system that could be made more robust. They could illuminate parts of character creation, no matter what your game. And let's face it, if you're here watching Runehammer, you are a DIY RPG crazy person. You're not the type to just play straight out of books. You get through the first 15 to 20 pages, you get excited, and you start making adventure. Those are my lumpy heads. And in the spirit of that hobbyist, I'm always trying to add to my collection. Not just, I collect books because books look cool, which they totally do, but my mental collection, my command of mechanics and possibilities that dice and game mechanics can bring to the table. The first one I want to talk about is Genesys. Now, Genesys is by Fantasy Flight, right? And these guys are sort of famous for their connection with Star Wars and these narrative dice. As a book, I'm not a big fan of this book as far as like what's left out, as far as, you know, like a lot of monsters and adventures and world to play with and sort of the actual substance of what you need to get to the table. But I'm not really here to talk about the book craft involved with Genesys. I'm here to talk about this sort of elusive narrative dice mythos. How do you guys know there's a proprietary set of dice that comes with Genesys with little pips and symbols on them, right? And in the book, they proceed to break down exactly, you know, how many of each there are and what it means for potential roles and what they mean and how to decipher them and interpret them and so on and so forth. But what I'm more interested in is just conveying to you guys a DIY method to capture the same spirit, and secondly, how I did it, and thirdly, why this is interesting at all. That's the most interesting point with narrative dice. So before we talk about Numenera, let's talk about narrative dice, which to me are the guts of the Genesys system. What I've built right here is 2 sets of my own custom narrative dice. So these ones, and I'll give you some close-ups, we're just blank dice. You can get blank dice for really cheap on Amazon or even at toy stores. and then I've just color-coded them with spray paint, and then just used a Sharpie to mark half the sides. Okay, so basically creating binary dice like used in Mouse Guard. Now over on this rolling box, I have these 3D printed dice that Cyrus Draken made for me, and then I've also spray painted them, color coding the same color codes, and then marked half the sides with these cool little white skulls, okay? The magic of narrative dice is that you get more out of it than just a sort of pass-fail. A DIY way to do narrative dice, and this is what I'm suggesting. So I have 4 colors here, and let's just focus on the player for now. I have white, red, green, and black. Okay, white I have for my abilities. So let's say I'm making strength, dex, con type stuff, right? I'll have a 1 to 4 in each of my character stats, and that means how many of these I get to roll when I'm doing a test. Secondly, I have skills in the game, and a skill can be ranked 1 or 2. Now this isn't Genesys I'm talking about. This is my own DIY version, which you can make at home and still get a lot of the same dividends that come out of Genesys. Now if you're a Fantasy Flight fan and you like their narrative dice, just go get the book and buy the dice. It's totally awesome. But this is a DIY method to do it. Okay, so your basic character abilities, white. Your skills, green. These are also binary dice. Your skill will rank 1 to 2. When it's applicable, you get to include it in your roll. Next, we have wounds or harm or damage. These are red dice. The damage of any weapon or spell can be ranked 1 or 2. It's how many of these you're going to add to your roll. And finally, your edge or advantage, which are these black dice. So this is having high ground. This is leaping from above. This is knowing this space because you grew up here. This is fighting your favorite enemy, and so on and so forth. These are going to add to your roll. Your whole goal here is just to get as many successes as you can on each of these binary dice. But the magic of narrative dice is what these tell you about the success or failure. That's where interpreting the roll, which is how Genesys describes it, I think it's a great phrase, comes into play. Okay, now over here on the GM side, these are the GM dice. I have black, which he has 6 total black dice. These represent difficulty. So I can rank anything that I'm doing on a 1 to 6 difficulty scale. Next, I have the environment is my green. And then finally, I have damage, just like a player does. Okay, Hankerin, now what the hell's going to happen? Okay, my wizard jumps up. He shoots magic missile at this green abomination over here. Okay, so in intelligence, he has 3. It's his highest stat. He has 1 skill in magic missile, and it's ranked 1 damage. He has no advantage or edge right now because he's just casting a normal spell, so this is my roll. That's what I get, and this is what we agree at the table, and there I roll it. Okay, so I've got 2 on ability, I've got no harm, no skill, so that's it. I have 2 successes. Meanwhile, this monster, this is a difficulty 4 monster, but it's not counterattacking in any way, and the environment's not a factor, so it's just 4 black dice. Okay, we have a tie. So in my mind, that's like the monster making a save, especially without this red dice coming through as a success. I feel like the magic missile flew across, it maybe grazed the creature. Now let's just, for the sake of argument, switch this roll around just a little bit. Whoop, we'll turn that up to 1. That harm is now in the roll. This brings me to 3 total successes versus the only 2 total successes here, and 1 of them is harm. So this guy is going to take damage. Now, if you wanted to do it one way, you could say there's fixed damage on a magic missile, 2 damage. If you wanted to, you could say roll for damage. It's a D8, just like an ICRPG. Whoa, I rolled maximum. There's a million ways that you can get damage calculation. But what's interesting is building the narrative roll, rolling it on both sides, GM and player at the same time, and then interpreting it. That's the magic of the narrative dice system. So let's have a different scenario. I have a low ability, like my dex sucks, but I'm skilled with bow, and I'm using a flaming arrow, so I get 2 wounds. So now I have this 5 dice to roll. Also, screw it, I'm on high ground. Okay, I have 4 total successes, and 2 of them are injuries. Meanwhile, it's the same monster. He only gets the 4 difficulty dice. Exactly the same scenario for him. I only get 1 success, so not only do I hit him with my flaming arrow, I do maximum damage with that flaming arrow. So You roll 2d6 damage is what I would do. So that would be one way to do it, is roll a damage dice per damage success. So now let's change some things around. Let's say that this environment, instead of these little walkways here, has this huge block in the middle. My wizard is again firing his flaming arrow, but this block is like going, and it's a factor, so I'm going to add 2 environment dice. So he still keeps that roll, but now I have my 4 difficulty and my 2 environment. This is going to be hard to beat. I get 3 successes. He still beats me by 1, but one of these is an environment dice that's a success. So I'm going to say one of his injuries actually is reduced because it grazes the stone as it crosses this space and hits the monster. So the damage is reduced. I only get to roll 1 damage with the arrow, so on. What's fascinating to me about the narrative dice system is, first of all, GM and player always roll against each other. The entire sort of mechanic, it plays out in a PvP-like way. Analyze exactly what I have in store over here. I get this much difficulty. I get a little bit of environment on my side. And oh yeah, by the way, this thing's in your face now, so I'm going to have a chance at an injury, right? And I build a roll. So like there's a roll. I built it out of the circumstances. You see what I mean? And they're popping. You still need your RPG imagination. The narrative dice aren't going to tell you everything. And it's the same with Genesys. They use terms like boost, triumph, despair, stuff like this. They give you thematic implication in the roll. They don't give you all the detail, and that's the beauty of the system. Now, I think Genesys is a little harder to learn than my sort of more simplified binary system here. But I think you can see the fun of what narrative dice do, is that they tell their own little miniature story about which part of that attack was your ability, which part of that attack was your skill, which part of that attack was high damage output, and which part of that attack was situational advantage. Meanwhile, in the GM land, which part of it was just overall difficulty, which part of it was due to the environment, and what's the risk of being harmed in this clash that we're entering. That is DIY narrative dice. Why do you want dice to be implying the details of combat? I think the answer is somewhat easy to see, which is that just getting a 20, succeeding, everything after that moment, you're now on your own. Like, you succeeded. You guys have probably heard the phrase in tabletop of like, tell me what that looks like, right? The GM will say, go ahead and describe that success that you got. And you're a little bit on your own. Now, a lot of people are up to it and they can say, well, I did a backflip when I jumped across the chasm. But the joy of narrative dice is that they give you thematic seeds of what just happened in detail. That is my sort of project that I did, which is a DIY version, a make-it-yourself version of narrative dice. Remember, this one's a lot more complicated. Mine is more suited to a lumpy-headed weirdo. There's room for everybody at the table, so have fun your way and enjoy those narrative dice, all right? That's what it's all about. That's my little project. Okay, next we're going to move on to the craziness, the awesomeness that is Numenera. Okay, hey, we're in part 2 now. All right, we're going to talk now about an incredible book by Monty Cook, whose list of accomplishments are not easily summarized, and the list of games are not easily summarized, but this is one of their finest hours. This is Numenera, a colossal world and game system by Monty Cook. Amazing. So if you don't know a lot about Numenera, there's plenty of research and discovery that you can do before you commit to this massive book. But this book is pretty stinking awesome. This book includes one of the coolest character creation sections I've ever read. It includes adventures, it includes monsters and items. It's a comprehensive, bring it to your table book. All the maps, all the world data, all this backstory of this crazy, it's amazing stuff. I'm not just going to talk all about all the details because you're going to discover that as you discover Numenera. But what we're here to talk about mainly is their innovative mechanics that they use in Numenera. Now the first one is really easy to understand. Only players roll. Well, only players roll. The GM does not make rolls in Numenera. And so what this means is if I have an enemy attacking you, I don't roll an attack, you roll defense. Hey, okay, and we do have D20 rollover going on here. All right. Anyways, that part is very simple. Only the players roll, and there's difficulty targets to hit. You got D20 rollover. Now, other things are going on in the game involving getting stats up and getting, adding to these rolls, reducing difficulty classes. stuff that we're all used to. What I really find awesome and interesting about the Numenera mechanics system is this idea of stat pools. When you're creating a character, there's only 3 classes in here. They cover a very wide array of possibilities. So the way they describe the character creation already was starting to pull me in. But then they're talking about stat pools. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm not sure I fully understand this. But this is great. There's only 3 stats in this system. There's might, speed, and intelligence, right? They range, and the numbers didn't make sense to me at first. They range between, like 3 and 20, I think. But most of your hero class guys go between like 7 and 12 as starting stat pool. This isn't a stat pool in the sense of like my intelligence stat is. This is literally a fuel cell for doing feats and actions. And this is what I find so cool about Numenera. Several games have sort of microtransactions, right? Or microcurrency. This is a small amount of fuel or statistical ammo, if you will, for doing moves in the game. Kind of like hold in Dungeon World, if you're familiar with that. Almost like how a wizard will budget his slots for spells in 5th edition. In Numenera, your stat pool is a fuel cell for doing cool moves. So let's say I have a might pool of 12. I can get moves that will cost me little bits of might. So I might have like a cleave ability that costs me 2 might. And then I have like a behead ability that costs me 4 might. And then I have like a parry ability that costs me 1 might. This is a really, really effective way not only to make character creation widely variant between types, but also to keep all the classes having fun with budgeting of sort of energy or exhaustion throughout the game. But instead of couching it in a negative way, like being tired or exhaustion or anything like that, it's couched in this sort of fun, cool way, which is like, well, I'm going to use 2 of my might. And yeah, I'm going to go for it. I only have 4 left, but I'm going to use 2 of these, and I'm going to... Right? And I find it to be absolutely fascinating. Now, of course, there's other pieces to the characters where you can gadget them into maximizing these pools and using them in better ways and regenerating them quickly. And okay, we can get into all that. But to me, the most interesting, innovative mechanic here is the stat pool system. Instead of taking a stat like, well, yeah, that's just a bonus that you add to your roll, which is, man, is that the most universal system? That's the ICRPG system, Lord knows. It's a fuel cell. Your stat pool is how much stuff you can do before you're worn out and out of stat pool. So I really like it. And then, of course, there is the player-only rolling to think about and talk about. Now, this is a little counterintuitive at first, but it starts to make sense pretty quickly, and the GM basically becomes a narrator and a difficulty target setter. And that becomes most of their job. The players are doing all the sort of lifting as far as dice rolling. Now, I can see the joy here because it says, hey, players, you really are the stars of this show. You're the one rolling the dice. Like, I come up here, this thing goes flying across this gap and attacks me. I roll more like a save rather than the GM rolling for this attack. So the difficulty is 6, so I got to beat an 18? Good Lord. Oh, parkour, 11, fail, it attacks. Another interesting thing in Numenera, fixed damage. Fixed damage on everything. This abomination does 4 damage. And characters have hit points. 4 damage. I mean, it's that simple. It saves an entire round of rolling at the table. Now, you might say, but I love rolling damage like I do. Rolling damage is really fun. But it makes monster design faster and easier. It's going to make the table go a lot faster. And it's also going to let players figure out monster capability instantly. That's most of it. You have some armor and you have other little parts and pieces. But these, to me, are the innovative mechanics, which is what this video is all about, that are worth thinking about. Anyone could put player-only rolling in any game. You just modify how you GM. Anyone could put fixed damage into any game. You just stop rolling damage and assign things fixed amounts. You know, like swords do 2 damage. Welcome. Whoa. Just whoa. Now, of course, you can add detail to the maneuvers that are used by expending stat pool, and that could change fixed damage. So I could have a behead. It uses up 4 of my might pool, and instead of my sword doing 2, which is normally fixed, it does 6. And these core innovative mechanics are, to me, almost as clean and as brilliant as Dungeon World, and they are definitely more detail friendly. Two sets of innovative mechanics that you can use or not use in your game, but more importantly, illuminate yourself with. See alternatives and think about, are you doing the coolest stuff? Do you want to pick and choose, or you just want to do what I do, which is just enjoy the hobby? I love just reading new systems, comprehending them, having that feeling, making a few characters, screwing around, fighting this silly green monster with my techno wizard here, my nano. And then saying, well, you know, what if this is over here and this is over here? And like, oh yeah, I see how that could change the difficulty. And go, oh, it's lunchtime. That's RPG Live for me. Hey, this is Hanker and Fernail signing off, talking about innovative mechanics. And we're just going to keep on exploring the world of different RPGs and how they can make whichever RPG you play mo cool. You got to up yo cool, you know what I'm saying? So keep it real, don't steal. You're always going to get a deal. It's Hanker and Fernail signing off. I'll see you guys next time.